Good morning. Welcome to the May 18th meeting of the Knoxville Historic Zoning Commission. This meeting is broadcast on several TV stations, so please remember to speak clearly and directly into the microphone. At this time, Lindsay, would you like to introduce our new staff member?
I was just briefly going to recognize Dallas DeArmond. He's our new administrative support for this board. He'll also be with the Design Review Board and the TPO. He comes to us from the municipal court system, and he lives in Oakwood, so he's very familiar with historic houses. So welcome, Dallas.
Welcome. Dallas, would you like to call the roll for us, please?
So just for the record, the Knox County Historic Zoning Commission has no business this month, so they will not convene. So we will go on to Knoxville Historic Zoning Commission. Commissioner Blackburn.
Here.
Commissioner Eason. Here. Commissioner Bradley.
Here.
Commissioner Fox is excused. Commissioner Hearns.
Here.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Here.
Commissioner Randazzo.
Here.
Commissioner Tillman.
Here.
And Commissioner Webster.
Present.
All right, that is 8 present.
Thank you. We'll now have the swearing in of the speakers. If you wish to speak on an item, please stand now and answer with "I do" to the following affirmation. I solemnly affirm that the testimony I'm about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you. We ask that all speakers please limit their presentation to 5 minutes. We also ask the speakers please give their names and address before speaking. Please sign in at the desk by legibly printing your name and address. Any appeals of the decisions by Historic Zoning Commission may be made to Chancery Court within 60 days of the date of this meeting. This time we'll have the approval of the minutes.
Motion to approve.
Seconded.
Thank you. It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Believe we don't have any staff reports, Lindsay?
That's correct.
Okay, we'll get right to business then. First case is in 4th and Gill. It is case 5A23HZ, 415 Livonia Avenue.
All right. So this is an exterior rehab project that also includes the construction of some new rear porches. These are photographs of the existing houses. They have 2 addresses, 415 and 417 Lavinia Avenue. So just to begin on the rear elevation, here's some photographs of the existing conditions. A non-historic 1-story addition on the rear, which is the southwest corner, will be removed. The applicant is proposing the installation of 2 two-story porches. They'll be installed in the recessed massings. On these rear elevations, they'll be partially enclosed with vertical wooden slats. Some of the windows on the rear elevation in these recessed massings will be replaced with full light double doors, and 1 infilled window will be restored to its original size. So you can see the existing and the proposed on the rear elevation there. And some additional photos of the existing conditions. On the west elevation, which is the elevation that adjoins the alley, as you can see right now, there's 1 infilled window and 1 smaller sized window. The applicant is proposing to install 2 new double-hung 1/1 wood windows on the 1st and 2nd story, with a 3rd to be installed in that infilled opening towards the rear. On the east elevation, you can see the existing conditions. These have no windows currently. The applicant is proposing 3 bays of new double-hung 1/1 windows. The 3rd bay towards the rear will be a slightly smaller size. These new windows will have low arches and sills to match the original detailing. You can see some renderings as well. There are also some other exterior rehab scopes, so the windows will be repaired as needed or replaced with new windows in the same locations. The replacement windows will be 1/1 double-hung wood windows with the size and design to be replicated. The aluminum windows, non-historic ones, will be replaced. The applicant will also repair, repoint, and repaint the exterior brick masonry, and then is proposing the removal of these 2 exterior brick chimneys on the rear. The interior chimneys, there are some center chimneys. They will be retained. And the brick masonry wall on this rear elevation, it may require full reconstruction, pending an engineer's assessment, as there's been a significant amount of moisture intrusion there. So some of the findings that I'll run through, and I'll go back through the photos overall. The Non-historic flat roof addition on that southwest corner, it's not original to the building, so removal is appropriate within the design guidelines. That's this aspect we're talking about here. Only one side elevation of these porches will be visible from the east on Lavinia Avenue. This is a good view showing that. The porch design is a contemporary interpretation of vertical balustrades. It'll be differentiated from the original porch details. The vertical wooden slats will retain transparency, and it won't be a solid screen wall. In terms of the windows on the side elevations, the design guidelines say it can be appropriate to design and install additional windows on the rear or another secondary elevation. The designs should be compatible with the overall design of the building. Looking at the Secretary of the Interior standards, they do recommend adding new window openings on a rear or another secondary less visible elevations if required by a new use. On the not recommended side of the guidelines include changing the number of windows on primary or highly visible elevations, which would alter the historic character of the building. And so all of that is just additional context that I've provided in your staff report just to discuss adding windows on secondary elevations. And that is there under finding number 5. So the east elevation, as you can see here in particular, it's highly visible from the street. It didn't originally have windows. The new windows will be compatible with the building's design. Details won't require removal or damage of original features. This wall in question is a large swath of brick with no transparency currently. The west elevation, which is adjacent to an alley, that's this one here. It's less visually prominent, and one new window is already going to be installed in an infilled opening. The 2 others are somewhat recessed from the facade. So the commission should discuss the prominence of these east elevation windows and with regards to the design guidelines and the Park Service standards. If approved, the new windows should include low arches, sills, and other detailing to match the existing. Regarding the chimneys, the design guidelines recommend retaining contributing masonry details such as chimneys. They may be significantly deteriorated due to moisture intrusion. They are not visible from Lavinia. The applicant should make every effort to retain these existing rear chimneys, but recognizing their lack of visibility from the street, if the rear elevation walls require reconstruction, structural information from that engineer's report could be provided to staff for approval of chimney removal. So the staff recommendation is approve 5A23HC, subject to commission discussion of the proposed new windows on the east elevation and subject to 2 additional conditions: that all new windows or 3 conditions. New windows to receive arches, sills, and details. Masonry repair should reflect the standards of the Park Service Preservation Brief 2. And then the rear elevation chimneys to be retained with structural information contributing to partial removal to be provided to staff for approval if necessary.
Thank you, Lindsay. Is the applicant present and wish to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry. I'm Logan Higgins, 133 Southgate Street. Blanked for a second. Is there opposition to speak? And can I let them speak first?
There is a neighborhood representative present.
Okay. Is it all right if I let them speak first?
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, Aaron Streeter, 925 Eleanor Street, representing 4th and Gill. I don't like thinking of the neighborhood as opposition exactly, but the neighborhood is in support of this application. We're really excited to see something done with these buildings. Everybody has been having discussion about how long they've been vacant, and it's probably over 20 years since anybody has actually lived here, and they reflect that. So we're very happy to see something happening with them, and we're glad somebody was able to wrestle them away from the Monday Trust. We do have the neighborhood. If you've seen the email that Lindsay sent out, the neighborhood did discuss the application, and we did have a couple comments that we did want to go over. We don't have any concerns about the removal of the non-contributing rear addition or the new porches. We did believe that keeping the chimneys is more consistent with the design guidelines. The design guidelines really are pretty specific about that. And in anybody's recollection, the only chimneys that have ever been approved to be removed in 4th and Gill are kind of small interior rear kitchen chimneys, which these sort of are, except that they're engaged with the rear wall. So there really are exterior chimneys. So we'd like to see those retained because they are pretty impressive architectural features. And the other concern is just that the guidelines say that windows may be or can be appropriate to add on side or rear elevations, which is a subjective sort of consideration, obviously. But they do have the Secretary of the Interior Standards has a interpreting the standards set of documents. One of them is in the back of your packet, interpreting the standards number 14, which talks about adding additional windows. So if you can discuss that a little bit, there's a diagram in there that, I mean, the idea is that with a townhouse or a commercial building like this, where there's kind of a two-dimensional face that is the character of the building, there's a little bit of idea that some portion of blank wall is kind of part of the character of that building. There's a diagram on page 2 of that standard that kind of shows what the Secretary of the Interior judged as an inappropriate modification versus one that is appropriate. The neighborhood doesn't really have any concerns about the alley side because it's not as visible. This visible side, though, I think the preference is if that very first column of windows were to be omitted, it would give a little breathing space to that original facade and then differentiate kind of the modifications back behind it, which is always one of the goals of the standards, to compatible but differentiated. If there's that breathing space, just one little column of windows not added, that is the neighborhood's preference. If you all can talk about that a little bit, I think the neighborhood would be satisfied that there was a discussion on that. Thanks.
Aaron, one question. Was there any comment regarding the new front porch?
We did have a comment on the new front porch. I think that the idea is it's not meant to be new.
Okay.
It's just a rendering glitch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Logan?
Thank you. Yeah, the front porch issue, we added a clarification there, and like Aaron said, it was a rendering glitch, so our apologies for that. But we completely agree with staff's recommendation. This is as Aaron pointed out, this building is one, it's very prominent in the neighborhood, and for years people have wanted to see something happen here, and frankly, it's in really rough shape, which is why some of the, like for example, the chimneys, and I'll get to that in a minute, but there's going to be a lot that's going to have to go into it to bring it up to living standards. But to address a couple of the things that were mentioned, the chimneys themselves, there's 2 sets of chimneys in these, and our intention has been to try to preserve them as much as possible. There's the interior chimneys, which 2 of those have chimney pots on, one of those has chimney pots on the top of it. The other one is capped off and not visible from anything except the alley. And then these 2 in the back that you can see in this elevation are definitely the more prominent ones. The only reason that we included in here the request to have the ability to move them is because you can kind of see it in this image, but where all of the water was directed down to this back wall, and gutters failed or got filled up over the years, number of things probably happened here, but these walls have seen some serious damage and have some very big cracks and some failings that we're having to address. And so our rationale is once we get into it and we're able to look into rebuilding these walls, we don't know if the chimneys, if it'll make sense to keep the chimneys, but the owner wants to keep the chimneys if possible. So that is definitely would be the ideal. And then for the windows, the intention is to make the windows be consistent with the other windows in the building, and same materials, sill and header design. And from the standpoint of this being a blank wall with adding windows and the historic significance of that, from everything that we've been able to see, it seems like when these were built, the intention was for them to be carried around the corner of this the next lot over, and basically create a corner of this block. You can see there's this building, and then there's an identical building right on the other side of the corner here. And just based off the way these were designed and built, like with the sidewalls being firewalls, our assumption is that they probably had hoped to one day wrap those around the corner, but there was a house in the way, and they never got around to doing that. So I don't think that this was intended to be a blank wall for forever. I think that this was probably just expected to be a firewall and would eventually get another building on it. I don't foresee that being a possibility now. So instead, we would like to try to bring in more natural light and make these more comfortable living situations for the people that will be owning these units. So really, I think that the more windows, the better. And on a wall like this, even though it's very much a blank wall, I think that this will add more variety to the wall and really make the building look better than, well, anything's going to make it look better than how it looks now, but will definitely improve the look here. So I think that all of the windows are appropriate, and we are happy to work under the assumption that the rear porches should stay unless we find a reason for that we can't keep them. And then one request that we have is with the interior chimneys. I wanted to get clarification because our intention has been to preserve those, but I'm not sure if in staff's findings, if that seems necessary given the low visibility of those.
Yeah, I hadn't responded to that one since y'all hadn't, and I'm going to pull it up on aerial so we can see. I hadn't responded to that one since it wasn't included in the request, and you had said that y'all intend to keep those. So right now, I guess the understanding would be maintaining them would be the requirement unless you made that as a request.
Okay.
So you can see from an aerial view, there are these ones that are internal. It's very tiny.
So, and the reason that just came up is there was a meeting on site that there were some concerns about those chimneys. They're very big, and they've got some engineering problems, and so they're kind of in question now, but they're not very visible from the street. So we would like to, but that may be too much to add to the scope of today, but just would like to get your thoughts if that's possible. And really our thinking is if we needed to bring them down, especially these in the back, we wouldn't necessarily try to rebuild an entire chimney from foundation up. We would probably end up framing in a chimney above the roof and trying to keep the look, but these are not going to be functional chimneys by any means. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Logan. Board, questions, comments?
I have a question about the windows. So the staff recommended that the new windows receive arches and sills and details to reflect their original elements. But on the front picture of the building, those do not have arches, do they?
Correct.
Okay.
And so I should have been more clear about that, I believe. I was referring to these more simple low arches and sills that are on the secondary elevation windows. You can see them.
Yeah, I noticed them, or I noticed those arches. So it looks like the building actually has some straight ones and some arch ones.
Right.
So they're not all consistently arch ones.
Right. Yeah. Great clarification. And I had been referring in terms of the staff recommendation for the new windows. I would recommend these simple low arches that you can see more on the secondary elevation than these on the primary elevation that have the more elaborate detailing on them.
You good, Daytwanya?
Yeah, I guess my thought process is when you're thinking about add new windows, either yes or no, and then if yes, then you look into, do they need to be this or do they need to be that? I was looking at the pictures in the packet, and they give you clear examples of what's totally inappropriate. And we saw that in an example where someone put in some much modern windows on some example, which was totally inappropriate. And then you see another example where they added windows that's very similar in style, which I see these seem to me similar in style, especially being, side windows or what have you. So I was just wondering if, they may not even have a problem with it, but I just wanted to get clarification on, would the arches be absolutely necessary or a deal breaker since they're not so different than what the original windows are? It was just,
And I think that's totally appropriate for the commission to discuss and define as a priority, because I think both could be considered appropriate treatments, and there's also the option of, differentiating them.
Yeah.
So I think that's appropriate. The design guideline that's relevant in this one is from the Fourth and Gill guidelines, is design should be compatible with the overall design of the building. So I think the commission has the opportunity to make that interpretation.
okay.
Yeah, it appears that this building has two types of windows. The front-facing windows with what appears to be a wood cornice detail at the top, and then we have secondary windows that may or may not have arches. And so my opinion is that these proposed new windows would fall into the secondary and not the primary facing. If anybody has any thoughts on that as well. Up to you.
And I'm happy to say that we agree with that. We like the idea of the arch, and that is consistent with the secondary windows throughout the building. So,
Logan, the neighborhood had suggested a compromise on that east elevation, as Aaron stated, to not have those first two windows. What do those windows service? What type of room is behind that?
living room.
But they would have some light from the bay window, correct?
Yes, they would, and I don't know. I don't think we would necessarily be completely against not having those windows, but I don't see that as necessary or a compromise, or a necessary compromise. So we wouldn't want to remove those at that request.
So part of what you mentioned, and I know this microphone isn't working very well, so I'll try to be louder. Part of the concern is, and I think what Aaron was trying to get at, and correct me if I'm assuming something incorrectly, as an architectural historian, that blank wall is telling the story of that house. So it is telling that it was part of that plan, that there would eventually be some build out in that neighborhood. And why keeping some of that wall is important is that is part of what helps us to understand not only that property, but also what was happening in that neighborhood over time. And so I think that's where the concern from the neighborhood comes from, is that you're not that you're removing part of that, it's just not as readily available by seeing that building without some blank space. So you say, oh, they did add windows to that wall that otherwise didn't. And like from the brief there, that's a very similar approach to what they suggest as an appropriate versus inappropriate. Yes, I understand on the inappropriate one, they have a whole mix of other windows, and that's not what our concern is about. It's about keeping some of that blank space so that you can see truly this was something that was added over time. And that, I think, is where they're coming from.
Aaron, you want to respond to that? Oh, sorry. Sorry.
I
My
would just say
bad.
that's pretty much exactly what our take was from a historical architect to an architectural historian. We have the same interpretation there.
Okay. So
Thank you, Aaron.
I would say in that regard, what I would express to the other members of the board is I would think that would be a much more appropriate approach than the preferred windows that they're proposing. But that's my opinion.
I do feel like because one of the chief elements of this design are the bay windows, and that creates an undulation and almost a turning of its own corner, that I actually do feel like seeing the full complement of windows almost reiterates that movement around the building, though that may not have been the original intent.
I think those are both great points. I think the idea of this party wall being almost an unfinished story for the construction of multiple townhomes is interesting. I also find the addition of the new windows completely undisruptive for a layperson walking across the sidewalk to see this, the significance of the story of these two buildings and their incomplete brethren versus what looks coherent now. I don't feel qualified to speak to that, but I don't think either is a particularly bad option.
As probably the most layperson on here with the least design experience, I still, when I look at that exposure, that secondary wall with the new windows added, it still, to me, defers to the front elevation. And so I understand what the neighborhood's concerns. I hear that, but it still, to me, reads as though it's deferential to that front elevation. And I don't know that I would think, as a layperson just walking through the neighborhood, I don't know that I would think, if those front two windows were missing on that side elevation, I don't know that I would think, oh, this was the intention originally. But I don't know, those are great points.
I would have concerns to see the front ones removed because I think it would then start to compete a little more with the facade. This design complements the front facade, which is recommended to not be competing. So if I was just walking by and there were only the 4 windows, that might stand out a little more to me. I was curious, this could be a question for Commissioner Hearns, about the smaller 1/1 windows on the side and if those are appropriate for this style of architecture or if it would have been a different arrangement of panes.
I think we're talking about something that wasn't originally there. We're talking about something, all the other windows on the house are on the entire property. Are they the larger windows or are there some smaller windows as well? I mean, you can see secondary spaces and I understand that this is a weird, on a corner, not necessarily clearly always a secondary space. It's a secondary elevation of the building. I don't think it would be out of place for them to be smaller like that. And honestly, I think in this case, with the smaller size, it helps to bring some of that wall.
The smaller makes sense. I was just curious, there are some 6/6 windows, and if like just a different pane configuration would be more complementary.
I think it's all or nothing situation. I think you either allow all the windows or you have no windows. 'Cause I agree that if you just remove the 2 front ones, I don't see what purpose that really serves. I think the fact that the windows provide natural light in the living room is very important.
May I ask what space is in the rooms with the smaller windows?
That'll be the kitchen area. So that'll be like above the sink, the smaller windows.
What year were these built? What year era were these built in, generally?
We think 20s? Okay, yeah. Okay. Yeah, so very early like before 1910 is when we think they were originally built. And then the
The National Register nomination says approximately 1900. Aaron, do you have further insight? I haven't done the research on the actual date of these.
I was trying to remember. I did at one point in time, I think they were around 1905. They were built by the man who owned the house on the corner. His name was Lynch. I forget his first name, but his house is 1888 or so, and he built a set of townhouses on either side of him, I guess with probably the intent of replacing his own house eventually.
I appreciate the fruitful discussion on the windows. I was going to move to another topic unless anybody else had more to add.
Please do.
What is the existing coping and what's the plan for new coping on the parapet wall?
On the parapet wall?
Yeah.
Right now, it's the clay tiles, and they seem to be in good shape. So we're thinking repair those, and then on the back we have the gutters that will need to be replaced. But for the most part, we're especially with things like that, we're trying to take a repair and replace, or well, repair and only replace as needed. So that's the idea there.
Okay, thanks.
Let's discuss the chimneys for a minute. Go ahead.
Okay, so I was wondering, in the front pictures of the house, can you see the chimneys from the back? Okay. I guess I'm having a hard time with seeing that they need to be retained in the location that they are. And that's all I have to say about that.
As for the interior chimneys, I don't mind seeing the interior chimneys removed. I'd like to see the rear chimneys rebuilt, if possible, even if it's just a reconstruction and not functional.
I agree with Elizabeth.
Logan, you said that the intention was to try to maintain or to keep those chimneys, but if it makes sense to keep them, what sense are you applying here? Financial sense, aesthetic sense?
So we were taking the approach, the thinking initially of a complete rebuilding and what the back wall is going to need to be repaired, like what's going to go into that. And with that was the practical of what happens to that back wall based off the structural report, and then also the financial of, you know, if that back wall became, say, wood stud with brick facade, if the brick was replaced as a facade element, then what would it look like to actually frame up and keep that? So that's where the little bit of unknown came in, but we really love the look of those, and so the idea, we would be okay with planning to maintain the look, even if that requires framing and, you know, not rebuilding true chimneys.
Right.
But then if that were to happen, come back to either you all or staff and explain why we would need to take that step of not preserving them. So,
Lindsay, how would that work if we were to approve it and then they set out on that course and found that it was?
Well, I think that would be best framed in a motion by the commissioners. One note I'd add is when you make the motion, the staff recommendation doesn't include the interior chimneys, internal chimneys. So that's one to include. Where the staff recommendation had landed was retaining those rear elevation chimneys, providing the structural information to staff for approval if necessary. However, if the commission prefers that that information come back, then that can definitely be modified.
But it could be a staff approved.
Correct.
I would like to make a point about how we're viewing the rear elevations. With Recode, we are now allowing more accessory dwelling units to be built, and I don't think we should forget the importance of the view from the alley, as we're going to see more people building in the alley and people residing in the alley. I wouldn't be surprised to see our guidelines change 20 or 30 years from now to say, you know, we used to not think it was so important how things looked, but I think we will in the future.
But right now, what do the guidelines say about it?
It says that recognizing lack of visibility from the street, if rear elevations require reconstruction, it could be submitted to staff for approval.
That was the staff recommendation. The design guidelines don't differentiate between rear or front facade elevation chimneys. They say repair and replace roof details and include chimneys. And then I believe there's also identify and preserve masonry features that define the historic character of the building, and chimneys falls under that.
Okay.
For clarification, Lindsay, staff approval of the chimneys would be for replacement of the chimneys, not for complete removal of the chimneys.
This one would be, the staff recommendation was for removal, but a motion could be made referring to reconstruction.
I'll make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to approve per staff recommendation that the new windows to receive arches, sills, and details to reflect original elements of secondary windows. Item number 2, and then as well, item number 3 for the chimneys to be retained with repairs or reconstruction due to structural issues, just to be submitted to staff.
Do you want to add anything about the internal chimneys on that?
Should we? Okay, that internal chimneys can be removed.
I know this is not the right time to speak, but since that wasn't in the packet, the neighborhood hasn't really discussed the internal chimneys except for the understanding that they would be retained. I don't know if that's, I mean, it's up to you guys, I guess, what can go in a motion and what can't go in a motion, but
That was
it
my
hasn't
same
been
hesitation,
discussed.
was to address something that wasn't in the packet. That may be a question for our council here.
I mean, typically, our practice, especially in the last couple of years, has been to assess items that are in front of us in the application, because that's what you have the opportunity to review.
Yes, and it's also an issue if there's an appeal filed, we always want to make sure that there is a clear record. So that's another reason why typically we just review what's in front of us today.
All right. Can I amend my motion to strike the 4th condition, or should I remake it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not been seconded, so you can go ahead and amend it. Yeah.
You want to restate it? I'm sorry.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to
Commissioner
approve
Bryant.
per staff recommendations that the windows to receive the elements described in staff recommendation for secondary windows, and that the chimneys to be retained, and if structural information is needed to repair, rebuild, then they can be submitted to staff.
We have a motion?
Second.
Second? All right, let's have a little bit more discussion, though, before we vote on that. The chimneys, Logan, the chimneys are not going to be operable, right?
No, not at all.
So I don't understand the need to keep the internal chimneys if they're not going to be operable. Aaron?
They are visible from the street. They have kind of tall chimney pots. I don't know why it's just impossible to see them in the photos in the packet and the street view, but at least a couple of them have these big tall terracotta chimney pots that are pretty unique to the neighborhood.
We could look at the street view. I think primarily what's the chimney pots that are most visible are the rear ones from a certain distance, but it'd be worth looking into.
It's difficult with the perspective of street view as well, from like car level.
Would that have to come back to us?
As of right now, yes.
To us and not to staff? All
Okay,
right.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if we move to approve staff recommendation, it won't have to come back before us.
The rear chimneys will not, but the internal chimneys will, because the internal chimneys are not provided in this application packet.
I thought that,
We were addressing them based on a verbal request by the applicant in the meeting, but they weren't in this written record at all.
okay. So what you're asking is if they do it needs to come back before us again?
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
Was it said that you all wouldn't be allowed to vote on that because it wasn't in the packet? Is that
Yes.
the understanding? Okay.
All right. Let's call the question. All those in favor? Aye? Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
I don't even know what the motion is.
No.
We may want to,
What's
may I
the,
suggest maybe doing a roll call on this one?
Okay.
hold on, what's the motion?
Yeah, Dallas, will you reread the motion, please?
Oh, you want me to reread the motion?
Well, that's Dory usually did.
The motion was to approve based on staff recommendations. Number one, the windows on the side elevation matching the details on the secondary windows with the arches. Condition number two, as it's written. Condition number three would be to, can you go back to the conditions so I can read? Condition number three, the rear elevation chimneys to be retained. If they need to be rebuilt or removed, it needs to go to staff for approval.
We didn't talk about removing them. That was not part of the motion, was it?
Yeah, I said to be retained. Yeah, sorry. I said retained to be rebuilt in my motion, so I did differ from the staff recommendation slightly.
Okay.
So Lindsay
So the
would,
third condition would be to, if the
Are you changing
chimneys
the
on the
staff
exterior need to be reconstructed, then they need to go to staff for approval.
So for the visual record, I've revised the, just to reflect the motion that Commissioner Tillman made. I have revised the text on the screen for everyone to see. Number three, rear elevation chimneys to be retained with structural information, contributing to the potential retention or reconstruction to be provided to staff.
Thank you.
Thanks,
So
Dallas.
did you change the staff
Didn't mean to put you on the
recommendation?
spot.
That's okay.
Because it looks different.
This isn't a modification to the staff recommendation. This was just me transcribing Commissioner Tillman's revision to the staff recommendation just for ease of reading here. It does look different because I just typed it here to show what Commissioner Tillman moved.
Okay.
It's good.
Are you ready for the roll call vote?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Commissioner Blackburn,
Yes?
Commissioner Eason,
Yes.
Commissioner Bradley,
Yes.
Commissioner Hearns,
No.
Commissioner Mitchell,
No.
Commissioner Randazzo,
yes.
Commissioner Tillman,
Yes.
Commissioner Webster.
Yes.
All right,
Right.
that is 6-2.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Our next case, we're going to go to Old North Knoxville, 121 Leonard Place. Case is 4C23-HZ. Lindsay?
Okay, this is a revision from the previous month, and so I'm going to run through this a little more briefly with the elements that have been changed since the April meeting. So this is a new house fronting Leonard Place. The house measures 30 feet wide by 55 feet 4 inches long. It's proposed to be set 29 feet from the front property line with an 8-foot deep front porch. The house has been revised to feature an 8/12 pitch front gable roof, clad in asphalt shingles, an exterior of fiber cement lap siding, a 24-inch tall foundation clad in brick veneer. The roof line has exposed raptor tails and decorative brackets and a 1-foot 4-inch eave overhang. The parking is proposed to be located at the rear of the house, accessed from the alley. The windows are proposed as aluminum clad wood. The facade has been revised since the previous submission, so there is this partial width front gable porch on the left half. There are 3 10/10 square posts on piers that are clad in siding. The 3-bay facade has a centrally located door flanked by side lights, and then there are 2 full light windows on each side of that. Now there is an exterior brick chimney that has been revised to be clad in brick veneer, and the rear elevation has a new window placed there. So just some of the elements that have changed since the previous review. The house is, this one has not changed. The house is proposed to be set 29 feet from the front property line. The average front setback of the block is 18, with the adjacent new construction at 123 Leonard Place to be revised to be 20 feet from the front property line at the main massing. So this house should be moved towards the front property line to align with the front setback pattern of the block. In terms of the revisions, the previous elevation was relatively simple and had an asymmetrical porch and facade arrangement. The windows and doors on the facade have been revised to be centered on the facade with side lights providing additional transparency. It is comparable to nearby 122 Leonard Place. The roof has been revised to 8/12 in pitch, so some of the guidelines specify a 12/12. There are craftsman houses in the neighborhood with roofs less steep than a 12/12 pitch. This revised design has incorporated that pitch and then additional details, including brackets and louvered attic vents. The elevation drawings, that hasn't been modified. The facade has been revised to incorporate additional detail, including those posts resting on piers, a centered front entry with side lights, and louvered vents. The side elevations do have a sufficient amount of transparency, and the rear elevation has been revised to include a window. The applicant has proposed aluminum-clad wood windows, which are appropriate within the design guidelines for new construction. The windows should incorporate trim and sills compatible with historic windows in profile and depth, with a profile to be submitted for approval. The applicant has proposed to install a wood craftsman-style door similar to the rear. These elevation drawings, they noted, show a full light door. Both of those would be appropriate. The craftsman-style door is appropriate for the selected style of the house. So staff's recommending approval of 4C23HZ, subject to the conditions that the final site plan meets city engineering standards, the front setback be revised to measure between 18 and 20 feet from the front property line, the fiber cement siding to be smooth finished, 4 to 5 inches in exposure, and be accompanied by appropriately sized corner boards, and then the applicant use historically appropriate window trim and sills with a profile to be submitted to staff for approval.
Thank you, Lindsay. See the applicants here.
Yes, hi, Quinn Epperly, 9812 Westland Drive. And we would be fine with all the recommended, all the staff recommendations. We weren't able to change the site plan. My surveyor had a medical issue and is since recovering, but we will get that switched for engineering and move it up to the recommended setback. We'll have the 4 to 5 inches in exposure of smooth hardy board lap siding, and we will use historically appropriate window trim and sills.
Okay, thank you. See the neighborhood reps here. Mr. Bowen, would you like to speak?
Sean Boland, 115 East Scott Avenue, representing Old North Knoxville. First, we want to thank the applicant for making the modifications to this, to his initial design. Those are all quite beneficial. We've only got 2 things to mention about this. Is one, we would prefer that staff approve the final door selection. People get confused occasionally as to what style fits what, and we've seen problems in the past. And then secondly, if possible, we would like to amend the application to allow the applicant to put shingles in the front porch gable. This is a relatively simple design. It does meet our standards, so we can't oppose it, but any more ornamentation to the property would be preferred.
Was the first thing you said, Sean, doors?
Yes.
Staff approval of doors?
Please.
Thank you. All right. You're all right with that, Mr. Epperly?
Yes. The staff approval of doors?
Yes.
Yes.
And the shingles on the,
I couldn't quite hear what.
Because we do like a lot of variety on our homes, and this is relatively simple, though it clearly fits the plans or our guidelines. We would like to offer you the opportunity to put shingles in the gable of the front porch to offer some more difference or texture difference variety if you would like.
Okay.
okay.
That would be fine. I think it was planned for shingles.
Okay.
Currently, so that'd be great.
Good. All right. We'll open it up to the board for comments and questions.
This is a small detail, but I think the vent in the smaller front porch gable seems proportionately too large. I don't know if anyone else has comments about that, but it attracts my attention.
So you would recommend a smaller vent there?
I agree. Also, had a question about materials. The 10 by 10 posts sit on a pier. Looks like it's divided about halfway from the bottom of the porch. What material is that?
That was going to be the brick veneer, similar to the foundation.
Thanks.
Did you hear Commissioner Easton's comment about the smaller vent on the gable?
That'd be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we could probably make it maybe more like the back one in terms of how, I guess, long it is. We can make it a little shorter like the back one. Would that be
I
sufficient?
think since it's a smaller gable, it should be secondary, I would think, to the primary.
Okay, that's fine. We can make it smaller.
Okay. Any other comments? Questions?
Did the neighborhood have any discussion about the amount of windows on the back of the house?
Oops.
It's the rear of the house. You can't see it from the right of way, so our opinion is neutral. Obviously, it looks odd from the alley, especially to your point about the future of ADA, but we're fine with it as is. Or rather, there was no discussion about it.
Yeah, I would say that the guidelines do say for infills that the windows and breaking up of the walls should be similar to others in the neighborhood. So I would be curious what the other rear elevations looked like in that area and if this is compatible with those.
I'm not sure in terms of the other rears of the street. Our previous submittal had no windows, and it was asked that we added a window, so that was attempting, or what we were attempting to do with that. In terms of ADA, or an ADU, sorry, being built, this is where all the parking is, and we're kind of at the maximum impervious surface, so I don't think there would be any way to fit an ADU from the back if that is the future concern. So
that's not necessarily the concern. The concern is that other people in other houses could have accessory dwelling units, and for this proposal to be compatible with the guidelines state that the massing should be broken up in similar ways to the other homes. So I would question if this meets that requirement. But I do defer to the neighborhood in their discussion as well.
I would be comfortable to speak for the neighborhood to say that we would be fine if we approved part of this application and the rear window could be discussed with the neighborhood. That's not going to delay foundation, anything at all. It's easily retrofittable. So we would be fine if that's the choice of the commission.
What's the function behind that wall?
It's the master bedroom. So we were attempting to have more of a space for a bed without windows behind it.
Okay. Okay, I'll make a motion. We approve this application based on staff recommendation with the addition of doors being submitted for staff approval and the allowance of shingles on the front porch gable. And the third one, a smaller vent on the front elevation.
I second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Not, we'll call the question. All those in favor, aye? Any opposed? No. Thank you very much for your patience. I know you've been here multiple times.
Thank
and
you.
Appreciate your patience and your attitude, and good luck. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Quinn.
All right, our last case is, again, in Old North Knox at 420 East Oklahoma Avenue. It's case file 5B23HZ.
Okay, this is an overall exterior rehab project. The applicant has provided some real helpful elevation drawings of the existing conditions of the house. And so you can see those on your screen here. There are a substantial amount of level 1 scopes of work that I'll just run through real quick. They're removing the asphalt shingle roof cladding, replacing in kind, repair or replacement in kind to the soffit and fascia, and installing new gutters. They are repairing the existing 2/2 double hung wood windows. On the left side elevation, they are installing a new window, and I've got photos of this. Here, they will be installing a new window in the original opening, so that new window will match the original size. It was infilled with siding, and it'll be a 1/1 double hung wood window. They will repair the existing back deck, refinishing and repairing exterior doors, repairing the existing siding, and so that is approximately 10% of this existing aluminum siding will be replaced in kind. In terms of the level 2 scopes, the applicant is proposing to remove the non-historic vinyl shutters on the facade, and it proposes to install new wood shutters. We've got another chimney discussion here. The applicant is proposing to demolish a chimney on the northwest corner of the roof slope. It's an interior chimney clad in Portland cement stucco. You can see it here. In stucco or Portland cement, it's recessed behind a facade side gable roof massing. They are proposing to remove a secondary entry door on the facade. That's the one you can see called out on the screen here. It's a non-historic metal 6-panel door installed on the right side of that projecting front gable massing. It was an exterior entrance to a second unit. They will install a new window. Oh yes, this one I already discussed. On the left elevation, close to the rear, the applicant is proposing to apply new paint to the brick foundation, which you can see, and I've got some additional photos. They will remove these non-original porch railings and install turned wood posts and a balustrade. On the rear elevation door, they are proposing to shift the location of the rear elevation door. So it's located on that left side. You can see it circled by the applicant. They're proposing to move it over to the right side of the existing window bay and retain that existing door. So some of the findings just to run through, and the applicant has already responded to a good deal of these, and so I can pull up that information as well. Removing the non-historic vinyl shutters and replacing with new wood shutters is appropriate. The staff recommendation would be that the new shutters be operable and reflect the overall size and shape of the windows on which they'll be installed. And the applicant has submitted a revision to this, which I'll show you guys, where the shutters are operable and are the size and shape of the windows and wood. The guidelines recommend repairing and retaining masonry details such as chimneys. This chimney in question, in the opinion of staff, is not a significantly character-defining feature. It is clad in Portland cement, and it's minimally visible from the street. In the opinion of staff, removal of this chimney is appropriate. Removal of the non-historic secondary entry doors, those have been proposed and approved frequently in Old North. This isn't an original or character-defining feature. It's not prominently visible from the right-of-way. The guidelines discourage applying paint to unpainted historic masonry. This does show an existing red paint or stain. The staff finding was that the applicant should provide additional info on that prior to applying new paint to the foundation, and they have submitted more photos of this paint, and I'll pull those up for you guys. It is paint for sure. Removing the non-original iron porch detailing is appropriate within the design guidelines. I would request that the applicant provide final specs to staff for approval, including the selected post and baluster details with measurements. The balustrade should be set into the top and bottom rails. The post should reflect those on comparable houses in size, and the balustrade is not required to be 36 inches by code if the foundation height is under 30 inches tall at the facade. Removal of a replacement of a non-historic side elevation window. This obviously meets the design guidelines. This door, which is proposed to be shifted in location on the rear, it is not visible from the right-of-way. It will retain this existing door, and it won't require the removal or alteration of existing features here off the deck. The last note I'd make is just a note on these. Old North Knoxville has some unique design guidelines on siding, speaking to artificial siding. So I did want to clarify why this one would have been a staff approval. If artificial siding is present on any elevation of a building and must be removed, it can be replaced on the building if no more than 49% of any elevation siding is removed. If it is removed more than 50% or more, it can't be replaced. So the applicant is just proposing a really limited siding repair and patching. It does meet the design guideline. They also have the option of removing the aluminum siding and repairing any wood underneath. New aluminum siding shouldn't exceed 50% of any elevations wall area. So staff's recommending approval of 5B 23HC, subject to the conditions that the new shutters reflect the overall size and shape of the windows, with specs submitted to staff. The applicant provide further info on the treatments on the brick foundation before applying new paint, and then the applicant to provide details of the front porch elements to staff for approval. That's a drawing with new porch elements to be compatible with historic posts and balusters in the neighborhood.
Thank you, Lindsay. Is the applicant present? Good morning.
Hey, Ryan Vernich, 739 Piper Road.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
Would you like to add anything to what Lindsay said?
No, I think that covers it pretty well. I do not have, I reached out to my architect to try to get the front porch railings designed, but he was unable to get that turned around quickly enough. So I was going to propose if I could send that to you guys in the future to approve when I send that.
Yeah, and the staff recommendation there was that drawing go to staff for approval, so that wouldn't require you to come back in front of the commission.
Fair enough.
And here's the paint. It's paint.
Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Boland?
Sean Boland, 115 East Scott Avenue, representing Old North Knoxville. There's a lot of points to this, so I'm only going to cover the ones we have concerns with. First, let me say thank you extremely much for taking on this project. This has been a problem house for a while, and this will resolve that. So we're grateful as a neighborhood. And also, or additionally, improving the visibility of the property is wonderful. When it comes to the replacement shutters, yes, we want them wood, functional. These all sound good. We want them to be Louvre because so many people are putting in farmhouse shutters on houses inappropriately. So we do want them to represent the time period. As far as the brick goes, and this is just a recommendation, whenever you paint brick or mortar, it can't breathe. So that causes your foundation to deteriorate at a more rapid rate. So if there's a chance to remove it, that's effective, that's preferable. Though we are not allowed to paint brick in Old North Knoxville, if it has been painted in the past, we do allow it to be repainted. So we're not going to object, just providing guidance to you. Um, let's see, when it comes to the front porch, we want that ironwork removed as quickly as possible. But to the staff's opinion, your porch post and spindles are far too narrow. To put this into perspective, that post is as narrow as a 2x4 turned on its side, which would look not right. So we are requesting that porch post, whether turned or square, be 6 inches square at the fattest point, and we're fine with Lindsay approving that. The same thing with the spindles for the front porch. Those are far too tall and narrow, so something of more girth would be preferred. As far as the siding goes, there's very few providers of aluminum siding now. It might prove to be difficult to replace, so please ensure that before you remove anything, you have something that can be appropriately filled in. But I would encourage you, whenever you take off any of the siding, look at the wood underneath. Just the past year, we've had 2 instances in Old North where siding was removed. The wood was in such good condition that they removed everything. What you have in there is old growth wood that's existed for over 100 years, which is going to last longer than most things you can buy. So, does anyone have any questions? I threw out a lot. Oh, the chimney. Yes, thank you very much. Though the neighborhood does not ever want to see chimneys removed, as you can tell from the previous picture, you blink and you missed it. It's at the rear of the property where no one's going to have any heartburn if that's not there.
Thank you, Sean. Any comments to those comments?
Yeah, I'm good with all of those. I think ultimately for the paint, my only concern on the masonry foundation is consistency of color, of things like that. I think with kind of the hand scrub, soft scrubbing of paint on the brick, I think it might be difficult to get a clean look to it. So I'd really want to make that look as sharp as possible. And I think paint's probably going to be the best way to do that after gently scraping that off by hand. But essentially, I'd be open to doing that as long as we can get the product to look as aesthetically pleasing and consistent as possible for the original brick. So, and then in terms of the porch, just to clarify, you said 6-inch posts, square posts?
And 6-inch square, but we all know 6-inch means 5.5 inches at a store.
Yeah. Okay. Any other recommendations on the spindles in between?
Mr. Tillman, maybe you can help me. I know what was suggested was maybe 1 3/4. That's far too narrow. Was roughly standard 2.5 inches. True, 2.5.
I'm not sure. Sorry.
We are comfortable with letting staff approve the dimensions as long as they are thicker. I believe 2.5 or larger would be perfectly fine. True, 2.5.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll take a look. And then just to be candid, based off budget, that the front porch may be one of the first things to go if budget goes to rise. So I just wanted that to be, I at least wanted to bring this forward to be able to discuss it if that's in the cards. And then the shutters themselves, yeah, they're not going to be this arched shutter. If they're going to be operable, they're going to actually cover the entire windows. So those should be covered with the new recommended shutters there that are shown. So I think that was everything on my end. Yeah, ultimately the chimney, it's hard to see. It's, basically covered in that. I think if that cement wasn't there, it would literally be falling apart because all of the joints have been pulled out over time, and I could probably lift each one out by hand pretty easily. So, and it's also going to allow me to keep the layout in better condition because it was a duplex at some point. That's why that second door was there at the front. So I think this is going to be just essentially a more functional house without it. So I appreciate you guys' consideration.
Thank you. All right, Commission?
I agree with Sean's recommendations, specifically about painting the brick. I know there are some nuances in what's already been painted. In some places, it looks like the mortar hadn't been painted, like someone had painstakingly cut each brick, but it's probably that the mortar failed. Its sandy material just flaked off, and that would probably happen again. And that's, again, it's bad for the health, for lack of a better term, of the foundation. So for future occupants of the house, I would advise you or ask you not to continue painting it.
I would agree with the concerns about painting the brick. I think that's something that needs to be carefully considered because it can damage the masonry. And I just wanted clarification. Did you say that possibly due to budget constraints that the porch might be something that you do not complete?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty tight on budget from the get-go, but I'm trying to weigh options for what would be the best things to remove from my scope of work, just because essentially everything on the interior is needing significant renovations that are causing the budget to increase. So my hope is to do it, but essentially it's a matter of how much I can actually afford to do so. And then in terms of to address your concern, Mr. Tillman, was I've seen at least a dozen instances on Oklahoma Avenue, at least, where people have painted, foundation brick, and I know that's not the ideal situation, but it's I think that's maybe a way to conform to the neighborhood without having it look. It just depends on what it'll look like when it scrapes off, but I can try to follow up with you guys and show you what it might look like once we do. So
I think the front porch is a critical feature of the house, and it should be one of the most important features. And this commission does not address the interiors. It is part of our scope. So when we're looking at the scope of the exterior, the front porch is pretty critical.
Just a comment on the aesthetic, because I know that's your concern with the brick. Removing the siding and repainting the wood would greatly impact the aesthetic, because you'll likely reveal the trim that's around those windows, and you could save money on not buying the shutters because the wood and the trim would add the detail you're looking for.
yeah, my concern is the way that the roof and a lot of the flashing has been taken care of over the past, I don't know how long. It looks like there's been some level of water penetration. So my concern is getting into that and having to, do extensive rehab of old wood and things like that, if that's the case. Now I'm going to start pulling off some of this to be able to, patch in the door and the windows and things like that. I think I'll get a better sense of what the condition of the wood is under that when I get to that point. But my preference would certainly be patch what's existing.
If you do elect to paint the foundation, I would suggest looking into silicone paint.
Okay.
I think it has a better lifetime and wear. John, you've got a furrowed brow. You don't agree?
I always have a furrowed brow. To add on to what Lynn has said, when it comes to aluminum siding, if there's ever been water penetration inside there, that is a perfect ground for termites. So knowing that, I would strongly recommend you remove this. From firsthand experience, I restored 317 East Oklahoma across the street from you. When I removed the aluminum siding, I could stick my finger through 4x4 supports in the house, because that was just keeping all the moisture locked in, which was a perfect ground for insects. So just a word of caution. It might behoove you and save you money in the long term if there has been water penetration to look at removing that.
Okay.
I had a question for staff. Say the applicant proceeds with an approval per staff recommendation, including porch elements, and they complete the project, but they value engineer removing the existing iron railing and columns. Would they be able to get a building permit or a completion of a building permit and certificate of occupancy, just leaving all of that as is?
Yes.
And then they would have the approved COA to do that later if they chose to for so many years, however long it lasts, as long as the existing railing isn't a code issue. Okay.
All right.
Just one,
There's-
oh, sorry, and just one thing to mention to your point about however long the COA would last, our default is that it would be 3 years. So just so that that's noted for the applicant as well.
All right.
Go ahead.
No other comments? Just checking.
Go for it.
I'd like to make a motion to approve based on staff recommendation.
Second.
Do we want to add some of the specifics that were discussed to the motion that Mr. Bolin added on the?
Specifically, the dimensions for the material on the front porch.
That's your call if you'd like that stated in the motion. That's also notes and things that would be provided to staff for approval.
It's already in there. Okay. All right. Any further discussion? If not, let's call the question. All those in, do we have a second?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Sean. Dallas, welcome. I'd like to ask Commissioner Mitchell to adjourn us, please.
So moved.
Thank you.